There's a place in the woods called Aspen Ridge because of all the populous trees which grow there. This is where we're from. We are the Popple People. Welcome to our channel. We're glad you stopped by. In this episode, we're assembling the track for a Woodland Mill's HM122 portable sawmill. Before starting, 4 risers were constructed to raise the track about 6 inches up. It's important to assemble and level the track on a solid foundation before tightening everything up. First, the 4 track rails were placed onto the 6-inch blocks of wood. They don't have to be 6 inches for this part, just make sure all 4 blocks are the same height. This gets everything up off the ground and makes the assembly process easier. For this part, there are several pieces of hardware of similar size, so be sure to check that, as you see here. You'll need 12 M10 by 30 millimeter flanged hex bolts, 12 M10 flanged lock nuts, the 2 reinforcement plates, and 1 of the green mid-bunk pieces. Place the green mid-bunk section up on the rails and insert the first 4 hex bolts to tack everything in place. Position the reinforcement plate underneath the rails, then place the rest of the hex bolts and lock nuts. There will be 6 of each per side. Tools used for this step included a 15 millimeter wrench, 14 millimeter socket, and a 3/8 impact with a 3/8 3-inch extension attached. In this step, it's important to note that everything should be snugged up but not fully tightened. Some wiggle room should be left for adjustments once track assembly is complete. Now, because we ran these on with an impact, they were pretty tight, so we had to go back and loosen everything up again. You'll see that here in a minute. In the foreground here, you'll notice the square tube on the left side of that mid-bunk. That's the log support bracket. You'll want to pay attention to which side you place that on, so think about it before you begin affixing this piece. As mentioned before, snug these up, but don't fully tighten them. You want a little bit of wiggle room for any adjustments, so you see us loosening these back up a little bit here. After adjusting that side, we decided to check for square before fastening the other side. Be sure to keep the outer portion of the rails 26 inches apart. Snug everything up, but again, don't fully tighten. There will be some adjustments that you'll need to make later. The other 2 mid-bunks, the ones with the log support brackets, were affixed next. Make sure all those support brackets are on the same side of the track. The same tools were used, and hardware included M10 by 25 millimeter flanged hex bolts and M10 flanged lock nuts. You'll use 4 of each per bunk. Get back there. be careful with power tools. Let's see that one again in slow motion this time. Wait for it. Just double checking to make sure all of those square log support brackets are on the same side. The end bunks were placed last because we've tried to work from the center outwards. The same tools were used and also the same hardware as the other two mid bunks, the M10 by 25 millimeter flanged hex bolts and M10 flanged lock nuts, 4 per bunk. One question we were asked is, why are you filming all of this? It's because this trailer is not the final home for the sawmill. Eventually, we'll need to disassemble it, move it out into the woods, and reassemble it there in its permanent location. We wanted a quick, easy-to-follow vlog or video blog to guide ourselves. It's simply because we have to do it again, and we knew that going into it. We felt it'd be easier to follow along with a video guide versus reading the written instructions. Next, the track needed to be squared up. This part took the longest. It wasn't difficult, but it was putsy work, checking and rechecking everything. To make adjustments, tools used were a measuring tape, a 14 millimeter socket, 15 millimeter wrench, a rubber mallet, and a 12-inch rafter square. The track should measure 26 inches on the outside of the rails, and this measurement should be even throughout. Adjust accordingly until the width is even along the entire track. Now the ends flared out about a 1/16 of an inch too wide, so 2 bar clamps were used to hold the track at 26 inches while the bunk was squared and tightened in place. The total time spent on track assembly was about 4 hours, and most of that was just the squaring and the leveling. Now the next step is squaring the track, and one thing we wondered about was the fact that we'll be measuring diagonally from the ends of the silver track, but the green bunks sit up higher in the middle, as you can see here, and because of that height discrepancy, we worried that measurements might be skewed and inaccurate, and it turns out that wasn't a problem at all. Make sure the track is square by taking diagonal measurements from corner to corner of the rail itself. If any adjustments need to be made, tighten the center first and work your way out from there. Once everything is square and the track width is an even 26 inches throughout, then tighten all the flanged hex bolts, starting at the center bunk and working outwards towards each of the 4 ends. You should always be working your way out from the center bunk. After everything was tightened, we rechecked the diagonal measurements one more time just to make any final adjustments if need be. These steps are crucial to ensure the saw head will roll properly and smoothly along these rails. Also, check that the 2 tracks line up evenly, as you see here. Assemble the leveling feet using 12 M16 by 120 mm hex bolts, 36 M16 hex nuts, and the 12-foot bases. The first nut sitting directly atop the base itself will get fully tightened using a 24 mm wrench and socket. The middle nut was placed at a height of 4 inches from the bottom. This left 1 1/4 inches of bolt protruding above the nut. Both of these measurements were checked to ensure consistency in assembly of all 12 feet. Attach the feet to the rails, placing them as indicated in the picture found in the manual. Thread the top 3rd nut on, but leave it loose enough so there's a physical gap between the nut and the rail. This is so everything can be leveled as needed. You'll see that in a minute. Next, remove the riser blocks from under the rails, allowing the feet to fully support the entire track on that middle nut. After doing this, we rechecked the 26-inch width and the diagonal 156-inch measurement again, just to be sure nothing got misaligned here. Leveling the tracks out of everything took the longest by far. To do this, we used a 4-foot and a 6-foot level. Again, start at the center and work your way outwards, checking for level both ways, along the track and across the track. For any adjustments that need to be made, turn the middle nut on each foot accordingly to level it out. Once everything is level, tighten the top nut. We used a 24mm wrench and a 24mm socket on a 3/8 impact. Next, you'll need 8 M10 by 25mm flanged hex bolts, 8 M10 flanged lock nuts, and the 4 L-shaped carriage stops. A 14mm socket on an impact and a 15mm wrench were used as seen here. The carriage stops attached to the inside of each rail on all 4 ends. We're doing this on all 4 ends because we will be using an engine crane to get the saw head mounted onto the track. Note that there are different instructions if you'll be manually lifting the saw head on. You'd leave the stops off of one end if you're doing this manually. We are not, so we attached all 4 now. The log clamp needed to be assembled next. Be sure to grease the threads before you thread the clamp into the arm. Insert the clamp on the side that has the longer tube protruding at the bottom. Next, attach this whole piece to the rails using 2 M8 by 20mm hex bolts and 2 M8 lock nuts. A 13mm wrench and socket on the 3/8 impact were used. There are several mounting options for placement of this unit. Choose a location so the clamp can hold the log against at least 2 of the log supports. Keep in mind what your cut direction will be, and that's based on which side you'll be mounting the saw head to and which side you put your log supports on earlier. Finally, the log supports were mounted. 6 M10 by 25mm flanged hex bolts, 6 M10 hex nuts, the 3 T-bolts, and the log supports were needed for this step. Log supports can be placed in any sleeve on any of the middle 3 bunks. Make sure neither of these bolts is protruding into the sleeve, as you see here. It should look like this. We used a 7-inch speed square to ensure proper alignment. One thing to note is that these bolts are not affixing the log supports, but rather they're only keeping them square with the top of the bunks. You want to check that it's square and adjust these bolts as needed. Loosening the T-bolt allows that squaredness to be adjusted. The tools used were a 14mm wrench for the bolts and a 16mm wrench for the nuts. The 2 beveled edge longer supports were placed on the ends, and the shorter key stop support was placed in the middle. Once the support is square with the top of the bunk, tighten everything, including the T-bolt. Repeat this for all 3 log supports. If you have questions about anything, email us at thepopplepeople, all one word, @gmail.com, or flip-flop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Stay tuned for our next video where we'll place the saw head onto the track. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more straight-to-the-point videos about our journey with this sawmill, please consider subscribing. That way, you can be a Popple People too. We'll catch you next time. Bye.